Before we get into that, check out all the great content that's available over at BangTheBook.com. My college football power ratings have been posted here for Week 13. Got some interesting updates there with that. Check those out. Working on the college football opening line report right now, but with the delay to the show here today, the day just kind of all thrown off, to be completely honest with you. But I do have up some of the weeknight college football game previews. We're going to have some more of those going up shortly over there as well. College basketball, we've got plenty of game previews over at BangTheBook.com for that. We're going to have, there's actually no golf this week, no NASCAR this week. NASCAR finished up over the weekend. We've got UFC previews coming out here this week. Still a lot of great content over there at BangTheBook.com. Daily NBA betting articles, Parker Michaels' NHL picks. Lots of good stuff for you to check out. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Finally, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio is presented by DSI Sportsbook. You sign up over at DSI using that promo code BTB and the number 25. You get a $25 free bet just for signing up, 100% deposit match bonus for the sportsbook, and 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino as well. At BetDSI, it's only a game until you bet it. And, you know, there are a lot of games for you to bet on. You've got college football, college basketball, the NBA, the NHL, UFC, soccer, European basketball, all the stuff that we cover over at BangTheBook.com, stuff out there that you can bet on. And over at DSI, an independent book, they're going to have different odds than the other shops out there in the marketplace. So if you can shop around, and again, that's a very, very important thing for you to do, then going to put yourself in a position to have more success with this, improve your bottom line. Just so many advantages to being able to shop around for the best prices. And sometimes those are going to be at DSI Sportsbook. All right, we'll bring on today's first guest here as we're kind of doing everything in reverse. That is Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
Going all right, man. Got a little bit of a cold, so I apologize about my voice. But I was wondering if you'd heard anything about our good buddy Jim Mora Jr.
Actually, I have. I heard that he's out of a job. And so here's the thing. Like, we beat up on these guys. We beat up on Rick Barnes. We beat up on Jim Mora Jr. And, on the human side of things, I mean, look, the guy just got fired. His family has to relocate. There's all that type of stuff that goes into it. But also, and I watched that UCLA game quite a bit. I actually had a buddy of mine over who's a big Browns fan, and we were watching that Darnold versus Rosen matchup. And I'm just sitting there looking at all the athleticism, all the talent on this UCLA team. And the fact that they're not better than they are, I mean, Jim Mora should have been fired a couple of years ago when this was a team that was supposed to make that national championship caliber run, struggled to go, 9-3 in the regular season. There's way too much talent that goes into that program for that guy to still have that job. So I'm glad that he's gone, and I think that it's going to be better for college football as a whole. Now the Pac-12 should get a little bit stronger, assuming they have somebody that can maximize that talent. I mean, I don't want to celebrate the fact that the guy's out of work and he's got to uproot his family and all that, but I will celebrate for the UCLA fans that their team's going to get better.
No, I agree with you. I don't like to celebrate somebody being fired from anything, but I think we were ahead of the curve as far as Jim Mora Jr. I think it was, maybe 3 or 4 years ago we were talking about Jim Mora Jr. being a real disappointment. And I think it took too long for UCLA to figure that out because, like you said, they have way too much talent to not be better than that. I assume somebody else will take a chance with Jim Mora Jr., maybe a smaller school. And if that's the case, we'll see if we can give him a hard time again.
I mean, think about it. The guy brought a lot of talent in there, and you kind of wonder, is it UCLA and the name brand that brings all that talent in there, or was it Jim Mora Jr. being able to seal the deal, or the coordinators that he had? But I mean, you're talking about a school that regularly brings in top 20, top 25 types of recruiting classes. Like you have to show something with that, and you've got a quarterback in Josh Rosen who. I mean, I don't know what kind of NFL success he'll have, but he profiles as an NFL starting quarterback. And you did virtually nothing with that. I mean, you can't do that in college football. So someone will take him, and we'll see if maybe he walks into a decent situation in a group of 5. But, yeah, the big question now, and it's amazing this guy's name is being brought up, basically every 5 conference job that's out there. Can UCLA get a guy like Chip Kelly? Does he want to go to Florida? Does he want to go to Tennessee? That's something that's going to be very interesting to watch is, what does UCLA do from a schematic standpoint to try and, get this team on the right track?
Yeah, I think Chip Kelly would be a good fit most places he'd go. I mean, I think UCLA would certainly be a good fit. It'll be interesting to see what he wants to do because obviously he's a really hot prospect at this point.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit here about the overall sentiments for college football this week. It is rivalry week. It is hate week, whatever you want to call it, and I'm going to try not to use the name of that school up north here at all in the shows throughout the week. But what's really interesting about this is, a lot of times people sit there and they say, well, you can throw out the records. It's a rivalry game. These two teams hate each other, this and that. But when you look out there in the betting market, there are some rivalry games that have significant lines here this week. And I want to get your take on that whole sentiment of, almost forgetting about what's happened to this point, because that's the stuff that constructs these betting odds.
Yeah, when it comes to rivalry games, more often than not, I try to avoid those games when taking a side. I've said on this show many times, I'm better at totals than I am at sides. I try not to overthink things, and I think that these rivalry games, it's pretty easy to overthink the game. It's, sometimes you can just want to grab the points because you see such a big underdog, and it doesn't make too much sense. But on the other hand, you really want to lay a lot of points in a game like this because you should get a solid effort from that team that, has the hatred toward the other team. I feel like I think some other people probably adjust their numbers. I don't adjust my numbers for these games, but I'm more hesitant to lay points in a rivalry game than I would be in a regular game. I think these rivalry games, what I like to do more than anything else is play the under, because intensity tends to lead to better defense. And, it's not too often that we see a rivalry game that is much higher scoring than you would predict, but sometimes you can see these rivalry games that it's like, wow, where did that defense come from? All throughout the year they couldn't play defense, and now all once they can. I think motivation and high motivation tends to lead to better defense more than anything else.
And we're not going to go in depth on this game, and I did write a preview for it over at BangTheBook.com, so please check that out. But Kent State and Akron is kind of a good example of all the things we're talking about here. Akron is not a team that I want to lay over 2 touchdowns with in any traditional format, especially not a rivalry game. But at the same time, Kent State is one of the worst teams in FBS, one of the worst offenses in FBS. They're just not a good football team. And people are going to look at this game on Tuesday night and say, okay, well, Kent State's had a terrible year, but they can get that silver lining if they keep Akron out of the MAC championship game, which they could potentially do with a win. Ohio would still have to beat Buffalo later in the week for that to happen. But I think that's kind of a dangerous thing to look at is, you can sit there and talk about a bad team wanting to play spoiler and maybe they give a little bit more of an effort or this or that, or, they want to win that rivalry trophy. And in this case, it's a wagon wheel. But also Akron's got a lot to play for here. So it's not like they're going to walk into this game complacent and say, well, we're playing a bad team. We're a 15-point favorite. We'll just go through the motions and win this one. So I think that whole spoiler angle is something that is overblown and can be very dangerous.
I think so, too. And in a game like that, I wouldn't want to take Kent. I'm not going to lay the points with Akron either, but Kent's defense hasn't even been that good lately, and we know they can't score. So, and Akron, maybe they found an even better quarterback. I don't know. But, I think it's dangerous to say, throw the records out. This team's, 1-10 going into this game, but it doesn't matter. All things are even. Everybody wants to say that on TV because obviously they want, a good matchup and they want people to tune in. But, what they've done at this point still has to at least matter some.
Well, and that was one of the things I talked about. I don't remember which preview I wrote about it, or maybe I wrote about it. I think I wrote about it in my power ratings piece. But people want to romanticize this idea of the big upset in the rivalry game. We inherently love chaos when it comes to sports, and you can get some of that here, with some upsets in these rivalry games. But people sort of romanticize that David over Goliath type of mindset. Well, in the real world, Goliath wins more often than not. And I think that's something that I want our listeners to consider here this week, is that you're going to have these narratives of, oh, this team really wants to win. The seniors have only beaten this rival one time, or the seniors haven't beaten them at all. And there's probably a reason why the seniors have been there for 3 years already and haven't beaten this team. Sometimes one rival is just a hell of a lot better than the other. So, again, don't fall in love with these narratives. If the numbers say to play it, if your handicapping says to play it, then you play it. But, I'd be very wary of, any of these talking head types of points.
Yeah, and along those same lines, I think that, the human mind is such that we remember those big upsets, but we don't remember those blowouts by the favorites. It's easy to remember that, wow, this team stunned the other team that was their rival. But, there's been a lot of times that it went the other way, and it was a big blowout, and we don't remember that. So it's easy to remember those big upsets and think, well, that could be the way this goes pretty consistently, but like you said, I think that that's a little bit overblown.
All right, let's hit on a couple of these rivalry games. Well, two rivalry games, and we'll talk about a big battle in the Sunshine State here later in the week. We're going to do that, the Pick 6, the exclusive free pick, and then try to work in some college basketball stuff as well. I know you've got a split here and try to hop on some of those Bet Online totals openers. And I do apologize to our listeners out there that we had the technical issues getting access to Blog Talk Radio here today so that we could do the show. Kind of push things back a little bit. I promise we'll make up for it with some really high-quality content during bowl season. But, Kyle, let's talk about this game between Ole Miss and Mississippi State here. The Egg Bowl, this time it's in Stark Vegas. Mississippi State's a 16-point favorite here. And this is one of those games I think that kind of underscores what we've already talked about, is that, for Ole Miss, they can't go to a bowl game. Even if they win this one, they're not going to a bowl game, self-imposed sanctions. So really all they have to play for is pride and winning the rivalry game. But also, Mississippi State is just a much, much better team. Far better defense. They run the football very well. We saw Jordan Thomas struggle last week playing against a real defense against Texas A&M. Gets a real defense here again this week. How are you breaking this one down, Kyle?
Well, like you said, this is an interesting one because, Mississippi State won this one 55-20 last year. Mississippi State was plus 10 in that one, too. So that was a pretty crazy game. 566 yards for Mississippi State, 528 for Mississippi last year. Jordan Ta'amu has been pretty good. Like you said, the second half last week, he really struggled. I had a good week last week, but one of my losses was the over in Mississippi and Texas A&M game. I watched the first half of that game, and I thought I was good, and then apparently something happened in the second half, and nobody could move the ball. But, Mississippi's offense, I think, is a fairly solid offense, but Mississippi is not playing any kind of defense. And, Mississippi State, their defense is much improved from what they were last year. I think it's really hard to gauge the motivation. And you have to think that Mississippi would at least be motivated to try to win this game. But at the same time, Mississippi, it'd be easy for them to get down in this game and then just go away. Because Mississippi, like you said, doesn't have anything else to look forward to. They know they're not as good as Mississippi State. So, if this game stays close for a really long time, then maybe Mississippi could pull out a win, and it wouldn't shock me. But at the same time, it's not going to surprise me a lot if Mississippi State wins this game by a bunch of points. So this is a game that I'd have to stay away from. My number is minus 16 for Mississippi State, so right about where the market is. I think that, as far as the total, I don't think I have any lean on the total in this one either because Mississippi State's been slowing down as far as their tempo. Mississippi wants to play really fast, but they can't defend. I think this is a tough game to handicap.
No, I think it is too. You look at this Mississippi State defense, only 5.1 yards per play allowed over the course of the season, but in SEC play, they have allowed 5.9 yards per play. So they have been worse against conference opponents. And what we know about Ole Miss is that they can move the football. They generally can score. Tends to be a very high-octane offense. So maybe there's something with that. And, of course, that also makes it dangerous to lay 15 or 16 with Mississippi State here against an Ole Miss offense that can score. Backdoor could very well be open. Another thing that's really fascinating about this game is that, and really this game kind of encapsulates everything about a rivalry week where you've got a team that's clearly better, a team that doesn't really have anything to play for except for pride. But you also have this situation here with an interim head coach in Matt Luke. And you kind of wonder to yourself, what kind of effort do the Rebels come out with here? Do they want to finish 500 for this guy who they know isn't going to be the head coach next year? I'm not sure. I think it's hard to put yourself in the minds of these kids. Maybe you can read up on some of this stuff. Maybe you can find a betting angle in that regard. But that's another thing here is that you've got a lot of these teams that aren't going to bowl games that are likely to make coaching changes, whether they're firing coordinators that recruited these kids that sat in those living rooms and said, I will take care of your son, or, you're losing a head coach. So that's something else here this week. And really, I think you kind of hit on it there of, if Ole Miss is down 14 or 17 nothing in the first quarter, do they roll over and die? They very well could. I think in a lot of these games, and really I think overall, we talked about this last week, I think the market's just trending to a point where you almost just want to look to live bet as much as you possibly can. I mean, if you can't watch games and bet on them with in-game wagering, then you're going to have to play the full games. But this is one, and I think we're finding a lot more spots like this where live betting would just be the way to go.
Yeah, and I think that, like you said, Mississippi's players, I mean, they know Matt Luke's not coming back. I mean, it'd be easy for them to say, I want to try really hard for him. It'd be nice for him to finish with a win. But they know he's not coming back. So, if things start going badly, it would be easy for them to lay down. It's just really hard to find value in this one. And I don't think, like I said, I don't think there'll be totals value here either. This is the lone college football game there on Thursday night. So, like you said, if you want to live bet it, that would make some sense.
One other point about this game, then we'll move on from it. 2 first-year coordinators for Ole Miss, too. Wesley McGriff on the defensive side, Phil Longo on the offensive side. And that may be a factor here, too, because like I just talked about, the coordinators are the guys who hit the recruiting trail really, really hard. The coach comes in when he needs to seal the deal with a 5-star or a really highly touted 4-star. But it's the coordinators that are out there pounding the pavement, sitting in living rooms, that type of thing, position coaches as well. You've got 2 first-year guys here, so there's probably not a great rapport with the players that are out there playing the majority of the snaps. And then also, the position coaches are all probably going to be fired as well, or at least, let go because they're having a coaching change. So, maybe Ole Miss is a spot where you don't get an effort for a team, whereas maybe if you've got a tenured coordinator, maybe you see a little bit more effort in a game like that. All right, let's go to game 119-120 on the board here on Friday. Virginia Tech takes on Virginia. Virginia's a touchdown dog here in this one. And, Kyle, I think this is a very interesting game as well because this Virginia Tech team, for a while their only blemish was to Clemson. Now they've lost 2 of the last 3 games, needed a goal line stand to beat Pitt last week. And you've got a Virginia team under Bronco Mendenhall that's trying to set a new standard for this program. Man, I think this is a very live dog situation here.
Yeah, I like Virginia here. What has Virginia Tech really proven lately? You look at the statistical profile of Virginia Tech, this is a team that runs the football a lot, and I'm not really sure why. Virginia Tech is 99th in the country in yards per carry at 3.75 yards per carry. They can't run the football very well, but they run it a lot. Virginia's offense has been better here of late, and if you look at Virginia's game last week against Miami, that one's going to be in the misleading scores article I do at BangTheBook.com every week because Virginia outgained Miami in that game. Kurt Binkert was really good. I know he had that key interception that was a pick 6, but Virginia moved the football well against a Miami defense that's certainly very good. I don't think it would surprise me very much at all if Virginia won this game. I know it was +8 there for a while at Bet Online. Bummed I missed out on that one, but I still think Virginia +7 is a solid value here. Like I said, Virginia Tech hasn't really proven anything for quite a while. And while I do like Justin Fuente, Mendenhall's a good coach. And like you said, this is a really good opportunity for them. Virginia has already had a couple nice wins this year, at least one really good win at Boise State. But this is a program that could really use that boost, that could use that win against the rival. And I think this is a good opportunity for them.
No, I think it is too, and I think that you're on the right track the way you broke that game down. The one thing I'll ask you about is this, and I like to play devil's advocate. I like to bounce things off of you here. How much of that performance last week was Miami just in a really big flat spot, and how much of it was Virginia being a decent team? That's the hard thing to figure out here at this time of the year. As you're going back through and regrading these performances and all that type of thing, I mean, that was a bad spot for Miami. They're not in a very good spot this week against Pitt either, but I think that was one of those situations where this defense has played so well all year long that maybe they just kind of had one of those one-off performances, and maybe it doesn't say as much about Virginia as we think, but, maybe it does. Maybe it says Kurt Bankert's a pretty good quarterback. Maybe it says Virginia's a bye team going into the bowl season. I think it's just really hard at this time of the year because you have to factor in all those different angles.
There's no doubt that Miami was in a terrible spot in that game. So that certainly has something to do with it. Having said that, like I said, I think my bigger reason for wanting to take Virginia here would be just, a fate of Virginia Tech. What have they done lately? You look at Virginia Tech, yeah, they're 8-3 on the season, but like you said, they needed a goal line stand to finish off Pitt at home last weekend. They didn't play well at Georgia Tech, lost that game 28-22. Against Duke, they won 24-3, but they didn't do much on offense. Maybe they didn't have to because Duke couldn't do anything at all, but still, I feel like for several games in a row, Virginia Tech hasn't played well, and you see teams that kind of, improve as the season goes, and or other teams that kind of regress. And I feel like Virginia Tech's regressed a little bit here the last few weeks, and for that factor, primarily, I'd look to take Virginia here in this game.
All right, well, let's look here at this Battle of Florida in the American Athletic Conference game, 137-138 on the board. South Florida takes on Central Florida. Both of these teams were supposed to be undefeated at this point, and if you look at South Florida's schedule and their spreads throughout the year, it is very, very hard to believe that this team is not undefeated. But they lost at home to Houston 28-24, blew that game late with a third-string quarterback, I think, for Houston as well, and De'Ara King. So, yeah, obviously for South Florida here, they have not really played anybody. I mean, UCF is going to be far and away the best team that they've played this season. Now, for Central Florida, on the other hand, you look at their body of work, they really haven't played any defenses that stand out. South Florida's does. Charlie Strong's offense has regressed, but this South Florida defense has gotten much, much better. The Knights are laying 11. We know Scott Frost is probably going to go somewhere in between the conference championship game and the bowl game. So is this a game that you want any part of?
I think this is a hard game to handicap again. The first game we talked about was a difficult one. This one is a difficult one. I do like Virginia. I feel like you said, South Florida, I think South Florida's had to move down in everybody's power ratings because this is a team that should have been better than they are. I know their defense is improved, but this offense has really moved back a lot from what it used to be last year. And I know Marlon Mack's gone, and that's certainly part of it, but it seems like the scheme hasn't worked out as well for Quentin Flowers. And Central Florida was part of a misleading game there last week against Temple as well. Temple was -5 in turnover margin. And to me, Central Florida hasn't really played as well in the last few weeks either. They had a close game there against SMU. They gave up a lot of points to UConn. So Central Florida, not really a team that I'd be looking to lay 11 points with. UCF was a team that really I had to upgrade a lot in my power ratings earlier in the season. They've leveled off here of late. I guess if I had to take somebody, I'd probably take UCF here just because I think they can still score a decent amount. But not excited to lay 11 points. And like you said, really, neither team's really played anybody very good here. So it's hard to handicap this game.
It really is. And you look at Central Florida's body of work, and, I mean, yeah, it's impressive. They blew out FIU, who wound up being a lot better than we thought. They won big on the road at Maryland. Maryland's had quarterback issues all year. Blew out Cincinnati on the road, hammered East Carolina. Pretty nice win there against Navy. The game that I think a lot of people remember when it comes to UCF is what they did to Memphis, beating Memphis 40-13 at home in what was supposed to be a huge Week 2 game. That wound up being an awful spot for Memphis because they had played Louisiana Monroe in the Hurricane. UCLA, that was a big game for them. Then they dropped down and played Southern Illinois. Then they had to step it up all of a sudden and play that road game against Central Florida. And I just don't think that they were ready for it. If those two teams met again, and they will in the AAC championship game if UCF beats South Florida here, I'd be looking to take Memphis because I think this Memphis team much, much different than they were the first time these teams played. So if that's your data point, if that's your frame of reference for UCF, I don't know how strong of a case that is. I mean, this is a very good football team. Offensively, they're exceptional. I think they've, 7.6 yards per play or some obscene number like that. But again, they have not played any good defenses. So I'll be really curious to see what happens with South Florida here, and then especially what happens in that Memphis rematch if we get it coming up next weekend.
Yeah, I agree because, a lot of people do remember that Memphis game, but that was a long time ago, first of all. And like you say, Memphis was in a bad spot. UCF then, goes to Maryland and wins. They win at Maryland right before that easily and then play Memphis. And those two games made it seem like they were really a really, really good team. And certainly UCF's a good team. I'm not trying to say that they're not a good team, but, of late they haven't proven as much. And then if you go back and look at that, Maryland's quarterback got hurt in that game early in the game. And, then the backup came in that had no experience and they had no chance. And then Memphis was in the bad spot. And, here of late, like I said, UCF hasn't really proven a lot. I don't even know what I'd want to do with the total in this game. This game's just a total pass for me.
And let's be honest here. That UCF-Memphis game was 9-7 Central Florida with about 4.5 minutes left in the second quarter. And then Central Florida broke a 96-yard touchdown run, and that was pretty much the game. I mean, the game hinged on that one play, and Memphis just kind of, sort of fell apart at that point. So, that was a close game for most of the first half before UCF just had that one really explosive play, sort of broke it open a little bit. So, I don't know. I mean, my number was right on at the opener. I think I had 9 and it opened 9.5, and now it's up to 11. So maybe there's a tad bit of line value on South Florida, but again, because they've played nobody, it's just not a spot where I'm really looking to touch the Bulls either. All right, so let's run through our pick six here so we can talk a little bit of college basketball on today's show. Let's go ahead and start on Friday here. How about Navy taking on Houston? Houston's a 4.5-point favorite, game 129-130 on the board.
Yeah, I'll lean the Navy here plus the points. Navy played well last week. Notre Dame was in a bad spot in that game, too. I should have taken Navy there. It was certainly a lean of mine. I didn't know what to do with the quarterback situation. AB ended up playing there for Navy and did a good job. I think Houston still has plenty to prove on the offensive side, so I wouldn't want to lay points with them.
I mean, it's interesting. Houston's facing an option, albeit a little bit different of an option here from Navy. For the second straight week, they played Tulane last week, lost 20-17. They got blown out by Tulsa. They lost to Tulane here. I don't really love this Houston team. I would have to take the points as well. Obviously, there's been a line value loss with the move down to 6.5, or from 6.5 to 4.5. But yeah, Navy'd be the way I'd have to look. And again, keep in mind here, there's still the Army-Navy game. But Navy's got a bye next week and then plays that standalone Week 15 game in that rivalry matchup. So for Navy, this is not a look-ahead spot at all. So I think you're pretty comfortable taking them in a situation like this. How about the last game on the board on Friday, game 143-144, Cal +7 against UCLA without Jim Mora Jr.?
Yeah, I knew you were going to say this one. I'm going to take Cal in this one. UCLA is just a big question mark to me. I wouldn't want to lay the points. There are some 7.5s out there, so if you can get 7.5, obviously get that. But Cal's played hard every game this year. Sometimes they're overmatched. Certainly UCLA has better talent, but Cal has a good coaching staff, and I'd take the points here.
How about this? This game will determine bowl eligibility. If Cal wins this game, they'll go to a bowl. If UCLA wins this game, they'll go to a bowl. And that's what's so interesting about the timing of the Mora firing, is that this is a team that could still go to a bowl game. So I like the idea from the athletic department to say, let's get these practices without Mora, and then we'll see what happens with this team going forward. But at the same time, you're probably not retaining the coordinators. So it's just a weird situation. I can't imagine the players are too comfortable with this. I love what Justin Wilcox is doing with Cal. I think last week was the big game for UCLA. That game against USC, I don't know if it would have saved Mora's job necessarily, but I think that was their big game. I don't think they're too invested in this one. I like Cal, and to be honest with you, this is one where maybe you want to sprinkle the money line, much like that Virginia game that we were looking at there on Friday night. All right, let's go over to Saturday here and hit on a few of these games. How about let's go to game 151-152 here. Indiana takes on Purdue. Purdue's a 2.5-point favorite.
This is a pretty good game now. Purdue much improved, obviously. Indiana playing some good defense now. I'm going to lean toward Indiana here in this one. I think Indiana's defense is the better defense in this one. This is a really good rivalry game under the radar. This is the old open bucket game. I'll take Indiana here. Not a strong lean for me. I would lean toward the under here as well.
And this is another game, bowl eligibility on the line. 5 wins for Indiana, 5 wins for Purdue. And this is a Purdue team that, with what they did against Ohio and Missouri, and obviously that Missouri win looks pretty good now with how the Tigers have been playing. We thought that Purdue was much better early on in the year than they are at this point in the year. And then they go on the road and beat Iowa. And, of course, with what Iowa's done the last 2 weeks, you kind of wonder what the hell happened to Ohio State there. But I think I'd have to look Indiana as well. Tom Allen is doing great work with this defense. And like you said, when you have a side of the ball that improves that much late in the year and you can see it so clearly, I think that's something that you want to look to buy on here late in the year. And that's what I would look to do in this spot. All right, how about Duke and Wake Forest? Game 157, 158. Wake Forest up to a 12-point favorite as they've taken the bulk of the money here early in the week.
I'll take Duke here. I think Wake Forest coming off that big win against NC State last week, which was misleading. NC State outgained them by quite a bit in that game. NC State fumbled going into the end zone there late that would have probably won the game for them. I think Wake Forest is certainly much improved, but I think the market's a little bit overvaluing them at this point, so I'll take Duke.
I think so, too. I mean, you look at this Duke team, and they need a win to get to a bowl game. They probably won't get it here, obviously, being a double-digit dog. But, for Wake Forest, they're a very interesting team. Good defense. The offense is a lot better than it's been in years past. David Cutcliffe really hasn't had that magic yet with Duke, and I feel like one of those spots is coming. And I know that that's a stupid narrative, like what I kind of talked about at the top of the show. But I just sort of feel like Cutcliffe's got one of those in him where this team – maybe even wins the game outright, but I think certainly they keep it closer than what this spread would indicate. All right, let's go to a real big game here. 8 o'clock kickoff, Eastern time, 195, 196. Notre Dame, a 2.5-point favorite on the road against Stanford.
I'll take Stanford here. Stanford's just been a good home underdog in general. And, Notre Dame, I feel like it's pretty confident they won't make the playoffs. And, obviously they'll get up for this game, but Stanford, their defense has played a lot better of late. This is going to be the best rushing attack that Notre Dame's played against. As long as Bryce Love is at least fairly healthy, I want Stanford in this one.
I agree. I mean, you look at this Notre Dame offense here of late, and it's just been disappointing. And, they've racked up some points against some ACC defenses. They racked up points on USC. But the last 2 weeks, I know that they were in a bad spot last week against Navy, but then what they did against Miami was just appalling. Brandon Wimbush is not healthy. They've got a quarterback controversy there. Josh Adams doesn't look particularly healthy either. I know Stanford's got some injury issues as well with Bryce Love, but this is one of those games for Stanford here where, I look at this game and I sort of feel like this is one of those traditional Stanford spots where you want to back a team like that. And I think this is, a good situation to do that. One more game here. We will talk about a rivalry game real quickly to wrap up the pick six for this one. Game 197, 198, Clemson, a 2-touchdown favorite at Williams-Brice against South Carolina.
Interesting game, and I'm certainly curious to hear your thoughts on this one since I know you're a South Carolina fan. South Carolina is my lean in this game just because Clemson laying 14 points in a rivalry game seems like a little bit too much when their offense really hasn't been very good lately. South Carolina, their defense is quite a bit improved here over the last couple seasons. I don't know if South Carolina can score enough, so that's my concern here. But I'll lean to South Carolina. But that's just a very slight lead for me.
I actually like South Carolina quite a bit here in this spot, which it always concerns me when I really like South Carolina because I've watched a good chunk of them this year. Their offense is absolutely brutal. I hate the play calling of Kurt Roper. I think Jake Bentley is a really talented quarterback. Kind of like a Connor Shaw with more arm talent like I've talked about here on the show. But, he just doesn't have the skill position talent that he needs right now in order to have a lot of success. In this spot, though, you've got a Clemson team that has a lot on its shoulders. You've got the ACC title game next week against Miami. You've got a college football playoff spot if they beat Miami in that game. And obviously they beat South Carolina here. I don't know if you get a fully focused Clemson team. Dabo Swinney's a hell of a head coach, but South Carolina got beat 56-7 in this game last year. Gamecocks haven't won this game since 2013. This is one that they want. They're going to a bowl game. They're 8-3. Is it a misleading 8-3? Yeah, probably. But this is a game where I think you get a maximum effort from South Carolina, and I just don't know if Clemson can give you the same. I've said all along, I think this game is much closer for comfort than Clemson wants. I don't think South Carolina wins, but I think they give a real game effort here, and I would certainly take them catching 14 at home in what is a very, very good spot for the Gamecocks. Kyle, do you have an exclusive free pick for our show listeners?
I do. I did want to ask you real quick. Do you think Clemson goes to 14.5? Like if you like South Carolina, do you think you can get 14.5 or not?
Wow. Maybe. I mean, because like I said, last year's game 56-7. I mean, I don't know if you're going to have too many. You're not going to have a lot of sharp guys looking to back South Carolina because statistically they just don't look like an 8-3 team. So I think a 14.5 is possible. Maybe if you wait around at one of the more public shops like a Five Dimes or Bovada or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. So, anyways, yeah, I do have a free play for this week. I know we missed out on last week, so let's see if we can get a winner here for this week. Georgia Tech plus 11, and I know I just said that I don't like playing these rivalry games too much, but I'm going to take 11 points with Georgia Tech. Look at the history between these two. There's been a lot of close games between these two. I think it makes a lot of sense because Georgia Tech runs the ball, plays at a very, very slow tempo. It lends itself to close games, and Georgia plays the same way. They run the football consistently. These are two of the 5 slowest-paced teams in the country. So 11 points is a lot more in a game like in a different spot. So I think Georgia Tech makes this game pretty close, and I'll take Georgia Tech plus 11.
I like it. I like that play a lot, especially early kickoff, too. You should get a little bit of a slow start here for both of these teams. And again, Georgia, another one of those teams here. You can notice we kind of hit on that theme a little bit as well. They have more important things to worry about. They have that SEC championship game next weekend against either Alabama or Auburn. Then, of course, if you win that, you're in the playoffs. So for Georgia, they have more to worry about here than defending the triple option in this spot. So I agree. I think that you're on the right track there with that one. All right, let's talk a little bit of college basketball here. I know you had some listener questions about some keys to college basketball betting early on in the season. What do you want to share with our listeners here?
Yeah, I have a few things that I think would help early in the season. First of all, do not place bets on what you remember from last year. I think that's the single biggest mistake you can make. There are too many changes to these teams from what we saw last February and March. If you're betting based on that, you're going to lose because what you're trying to do here at early season is find new things about these teams, not remember what you thought about last year. So I think that's the biggest mistake you can make. And tied in with that, I would say early season has consistently been a really good time to go against the public in college basketball. And I think that makes a lot of sense from what I just talked about there. The public generally bets a name and not the team. And, they're guilty of wanting to bet last March's darlings early in the season. So I think some of the teams you find the most value on early in the year as far as sides are usually the teams that are going against some of those darlings from last March. It's hard as a fan. Especially a lot of people don't pay attention to college basketball throughout the year until we get to, February and March after the NFL is done. So, they're remembering what they saw at the end of last year. It's hard to not like those teams that were the Cinderella stories last March. So I think that's something to be really careful about. And like I said, fading the public has done a lot better early in the season. I really think that's why.
That's something I tried to fish for information on with some of my other guests last week, and I guess I can do that here with you, is who are some of those teams? Who are some of those name brand teams or those those darlings, those mid-major darlings that have taken a significant step back this year?
I don't know if I'd say they've taken a significant step back, but I'd say, looking against a team like Northwestern, Northwestern's gotten a lot of love this year based on the fact that, they were the darling there last year, and you can't blame anybody for rooting for Northwestern. I was certainly rooting for them last year. I think that, their lines have gotten inflated this year. Middle Tennessee is still a really good team, but Middle Tennessee has now made a lot of noise in the tournament, and that's a team that I think at this point is getting, overvalued in the marketplace in general, especially when they're laying points. Middle Tennessee is a team that has a lot of low-scoring games. They win with defense, so that's a couple teams off the top of my head that I would say they're good teams, but they're not as good as they're being priced at right now. I'm sure there are other mid-major teams, I don't think that they would fit the public thought, but, a team like UC Irvine's not as good as they used to be in the Big West. But in the Big West, UC Irvine dropping off quite a bit could still be the best team in that league because, it's such a weak league. So I think you have to look more toward a team that, like in Middle Tennessee or Northwestern, those types of teams, going against them, playing with a solid team there, I think will have value here early in the season because, like I said, everybody remembers last March and who did really well there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought some of those teams up because it's also really hard for these mid-major teams to sustain that level of success year after year because a lot of times they're getting that once-in-a-generation or twice-in-a-generation type of player that really carries them, and then that guy leaves or transfers or whatever else. That's a significant drop-off, and it's very, very hard for teams like that to sort of pick that up. Or it may also be a coaching thing. I think of a team like Arkansas Little Rock, for example. 2 years ago they were really, really good. Last year, they were a sub-500 team. So, those things happen where you get a significant amount of roster turnover, and you have some of those schools that they can't sustain a high level.
Right, and we figured out since then, we talked about it, I remember a couple of years ago, Chris Beard's just a really good coach. He's a tremendous coach. You get a really, really good coach at a mid-major level, especially in a conference that isn't very good. They can really turn a team around quickly, and then if they leave, things can go back the other way pretty quickly. So, yeah, definitely keep an eye on teams who you feel have lost a good coach as well because that could be a pretty big drop-off. The next thing I wanted to say was I think a really good thing to remember, and this week is a time where we see a lot of these games, the under is a good way to look at neutral court games early in the season. The under is hitting at 56.5% in neutral court games in the first month of the season, as long as the total is 135 or higher in the past 10 years. So you're not talking about a outlandish number at all in 135 points. There's a lot of these games coming up this week. Why is this? Well, we've talked about this before. Shooting backdrops are different. You're used to the one that you play on at home, and you're also used to the ones that you play on the road and at a consistently year after year. But when you're playing in a place that you've never played before, especially with, youngsters who, maybe they're stepping into a really big arena where they're not used to playing in either arena that has that many people in it or an arena that's pretty empty that has a bunch of seats. That's a lot harder for shooters. So the under in these neutral court games early in the season, definitely a strong angle.
Yeah, and like you said, a lot of seats. There's not a whole lot of buzz in the crowd because you a lot of times have these neutral site games of teams that are nowhere from the area. I know I was looking through the schedule for later in the week, and a lot of these neutral site tournaments, you just have teams kind of whoever wants to play in that tournament can play in that tournament. Whoever's willing to pony up the travel costs to do it goes out there. And, a lot of times these are teams that don't play each other. They don't really know what to expect. So I think that's another part of it, too, is you've got that feeling out process in the first half where you're trying to decipher a defense on the fly. You haven't done a whole lot of film study because, it's early on in the season. Coaches are worried about refining their own teams and their own offensive sets and defensive rotations and all that. They're not looking at the opposition. So you have to do that, feeling out trial and error type thing early on in the game. And sometimes it takes a while to get into that rhythm.
Yeah, and I honestly think that first half unders would probably be a higher percentage of full game. I don't have the number on first half unders, but I imagine first half unders have hit an even better rate than full game unders because as we've talked about here before, first of all, you would think the lower shooting percentages would be in the first half if you're not used to an arena because you start to get adjusted a little bit. Second of all, you're not going to have the foul fest at the end of the first half, and some of those can get pretty epic there at the end of the game. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. Another one I would say, and this seems kind of obvious, so I know I sound like Mr. Obvious saying this, but watch these games and look through the stats and learn something about these teams early in the season. College basketball is 100% a sport where the more you watch, the more you find out about a team and how they want to play. College basketball has a lot to do with matchups and styles. You can't get as much from watching a baseball game as you can from watching a college basketball game. College basketball, you see what a team is trying to run. You see where their strengths and weaknesses are. It's right in front of you so that you can, kind of have that in your memory bank. So the next time you see their line and they're playing against a team that maybe has a weakness in that spot, say you have a team with a strong front court and you see them against a team that doesn't have any good big guys, that's something to keep in mind. So I think that, like I said, it sounds pretty obvious, but I don't think enough people do it. Early in the season, even if you're not placing a bet on that game, if you get a chance to watch a game, just make some notes. Maybe you write them down. Maybe you put them on, Microsoft Word or on a Google Sheet or something like that, and you just save those for the future. And then the next time that team comes around, you look to see who they're matching up against because, early in the season now, not too many people are going to be paying attention to college basketball, and I think the lines are softer early in the season, especially for these smaller conference games.
Yeah, and there's so much turnover, whether you talk about player turnover or coaching turnover, that, sometimes you just don't know what these teams are going to look like. Sometimes, I talked about it already. If you've got a mid-major that lost a generational type of scorer, well, even if it's the same coach, he probably needs to make some adjustments. If they're going to lose 22 points per game, well, either you got to play a little bit faster and try and make up for that offense, or you play a little bit slower and try not to expose the fact that you're going to be bad on offense. So, I agree with what you're saying there. If you get a chance to watch some of these games, actually see some of these teams, and start making some of those notes, that's only going to help you, especially with so many games, so many teams. We talk about specialization all the time. If you're not even specializing in conferences, but specializing in teams, as long as you're setting yourself up to be, to get edges on the market in some way, shape, or form, that's only going to help you.
Yeah, and even early in the season here, we have a decent amount of teams that are the smaller conference teams on TV because they're playing in that tournament. Like you said, some of these tournaments are just really looking for teams, and if they're willing to play in it, you see like last night on national television was Hofstra against Auburn. That'd be a great example of, you want to make some notes about Hofstra. That's a great time to do it because most people are going to pay attention to them, but they're on TV where you can watch their game. So definitely look for spots like that. And then I've said this before, and I know we even said it last week, but look for really big changes in style or new coaches, and really look for this in the smaller conferences because if you find a new coach who wants to completely change the way a team's played, say they want to slow down the game, they want to get the ball inside where in the past they've been pressing and running or something like that, you're going to find a lot of value playing unders in a spot like that. It could be the other way around, playing an over. It could also be, taking them as a big underdog if they're going to play a lot slower just because there won't be as many possessions in a game. So remember that there are a lot of ways to find value there and really look for those significant changes in style and the new coaches from last year to this year.
One other point that I'll make here is, obviously you need to be doing more than just looking at the records, but make sure that you're looking at who these teams have actually played. For example, you look at a team like North Florida, they played at Michigan State, at that team up north, at Virginia Commonwealth, at Florida, hosted Mount St. Mary's, and then played on the road at Wofford. Now, the last two games they've lost by 3 points, but they've played, some teams that are significantly better than them, and they're just in the Atlantic Sun Conference, so not all their games have been lined, obviously, but that matters too. I mean, who you're playing is a big deal. We've talked about some of those teams before, like a Long Beach State, where they just play a miserable non-conference schedule, get into conference play with a terrible record, then all of a sudden there's value on them. So keep that in mind too, who these teams have actually played, because once they get games against comparable or lesser competition, maybe you want to look to play on them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some teams can really run up a nice record here in the early going by playing nobody. And those teams can be good to fade here coming up, especially as conference season starts. And then you also find these teams that never play a road game, and all once they go play a road game, and that's usually a good spot to go against them when they're on their first road game, especially if they're a young team. So definitely those are some things to keep in mind as well.
All right, I know that we had a listener want to talk about the SEC a little bit from a college basketball standpoint, certainly not as heralded as the SEC from a college football standpoint. I know that you had a list of thoughts here to talk about with this conference. So, we'll try to focus on some of these conferences here as we go along over the next few episodes of the show. But for today, we'll talk about the SEC. So, what's kind of your starting point with this conference, Kyle?
Well, first of all, Kentucky doesn't have the easy path that we've seen in the past. It's partially because Kentucky's not as good as they've been in some of the other years. Now, I'm not saying that Kentucky can't be a really good team by the end of this year. Of course they can. Kentucky's a lot better right now on defense than they are on offense. But, they're not the runaway favorite in this league that they've been in a lot of years in the past. I think Florida is a team with Final Four potential. I really, really like their coach in Mike White. I think he's been underrated by many people. 7 players back from a really good team last year. I think they should be even better this year. I've read quite a bit about White and what he does as far as, bringing in psychologists and things to try to work with them to improve their free throw shooting. They did that last year. They went up like 7 or 8% from the free throw line. You know, I like a guy that thinks outside the box, and I think Mike White does that. He's one of those young coaches that is willing to play to whatever kind of style his team needs to play at based on, you know, where his talent is that year. You know, Florida's going to play some really good aggressive defense. They're going to press sometimes, and they have really good guard play. And, you know, good guard play is really important in college basketball now. So it certainly would not surprise me if Florida wins this conference. And like I said, I really think Florida has Final Four potential.
Well, and you know, it's really interesting when you look at how this thing played out last year with some of these teams. You've got Alabama that's barely cracked into the top 25 this year. You've got South Carolina, who went to the Final Four last year, but, you know, they lose Sindarius Thornwell, and he's pretty much their entire team from last year. So, you know, that's a team that should regress. Vanderbilt is a team that, you know, historically we think about being pretty good, but they're off to a little bit of a slow start here this year. You know, lost to Belmont in that battle in Nashville, lost to USC. A close win over UNC Asheville. So this is one of those conferences where, you know, whatever you know from previous years, Kentucky's good, Florida's good, and the rest of these teams just kind of trade off being good or being average or being below average.
Yeah, you know, some of my notes for the rest of the conference here, I'll just kind of roll through them here pretty quickly. But Texas A&M looked amazing in that first game without the two best players against West Virginia, so a team to keep an eye on for sure. You know, I'm not sure what to think about that game because I thought West Virginia was really good. Texas A&M had no problems just throttling them in that game as a 6.5, 7-point dog. So Texas A&M has a high upside. Missouri has a top 5 recruiting class this year. You know, I have to say I don't really like Konzo Martin very much. I don't think he's proven that much, especially compared to the talent that he's had. So let's see if he can prove me wrong this year. I know Missouri has some really good talent. I want to see how they do this season. Arkansas, I think they have a good enough backcourt, to be good in Mike Anderson's 40 Minutes of Hell system this year. I think they're underrated by most people, so I think Arkansas could be a good team to back here for a while. You mentioned South Carolina. They go from being a perimeter-oriented team last year to a team that has to get the ball inside a lot this year, and Frank Martin's talked about that. How it's just a really big change from last year's team to this year's team. And like you said, it's primarily just because Darius Thornwell meant everything to this team. And, their defense got worse without him, certainly, and then their offense got a lot worse as well. You know, I think South Carolina has quite a few question marks early on, but Martin's teams always get better. He's a good coach. I think he'll maximize his talent. I think Chris Silva needs to step up and be the team's leader on the inside this year. Georgia, a team that was unlucky last year, they lost so many close games. They lost several buzzer beaters. Can they take the next step? You know, I think they could. It wouldn't surprise me if Georgia gets a lot better this year because Ayante Maton is one of the best players in this conference for sure, and I think he is an NBA player in the future. So Georgia, it wouldn't surprise me if they get a decent amount better. And then, the rest of the teams there lower in the conference, I don't see as having much potential to get too much higher here in the conference. I guess I should at least mention Tennessee because we like to cut on Rick Barnes, but I don't think Tennessee has a very high upside. Rick Barnes talked about how they've had a lot of people injured last year, and if they stay healthy, they'll be a lot better this year. But I just don't see the talent being that high, and obviously Barnes hasn't done a good job maximizing talent in the past.
One thing I'll ask you about South Carolina here, when you see a team that is so dominated by one player, like a Sindarius Thornwell, and I'm sure that there are others around the country that if I had a couple seconds I would think about here, is that a team that becomes kind of an underlook the next season because Thornwell meant so much really on both sides of the ball? So, is it one of those situations where for South Carolina, offensively it's going to be more of a struggle, but also defensively, because they don't have that scorer and because they don't have that guy that can pretty much defend almost all 5 positions, he was that good, that, there's more help defense, there's more of a trapping style. Is that something you can kind of pick up on with a team that does lose a superstar?
Well, I'm looking at South Carolina right now. They're playing slower than they were last year, and I think that makes sense that they're being a little bit more cautious. They're looking to get the ball inside. Their defense isn't quite as good as last year, and their offense is quite a bit worse than last year, which is not surprising. So, I think in general, though, teams that lose a star are just going to be more cautious to start the next season. So as long as you still think that they're good defensively And I think Frank Martin's teams are going to be good defensively every year. As long as you think they're still going to be good defensively, I think the under holds value early in the season. And then, as far as the side, you just have to look at them based on their matchups. And like I said, this year, I think South Carolina's strength is in the front court, and I think South Carolina could have some trouble with teams that play aggressive defense and pressing their guards, because they don't really have a good point guard to get through that kind of press and trap system. I think Florida would be a tough matchup for South Carolina. I know South Carolina knocked them out of the tournament last year, so I think that'll be an interesting game coming up. But, yeah, in general, I do think that, if you find a team that's lost a superstar from the year before, under would hold more value early in the season because they're probably going to be more cautious. And if they're more cautious, that should probably mean less possessions in the game.
Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com. I know we covered a lot. I know we kind of flipped the script a little bit, and I do appreciate your patience here while we were working through some of those issues with Blog Talk Radio. But what's going on over at HunterSportsPicks.com right now?
Well, I'm glad it worked out that we could still do this. And, I don't want to give much of a sales pitch this week. 13-7 last weekend. Sign up for my free picks newsletter, Hunter Sports Picks, 59-29 run there. But I want to say happy Thanksgiving to all the listeners. We have a lot of really good listeners here, and people have really reached out a lot. I certainly appreciate that. And, this is a really good week coming up. It's pretty awesome to be able to, stuff our faces, have turkey and stuffing, things like that, and watch football. So I really like this week. It's a busy week, but, happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Hope everybody has a good Thanksgiving, and also happy Thanksgiving, Adam, to you and your wife.
Well, thank you so much, man. I appreciate that. Happy Thanksgiving to you and yours as well. I know both of us have a lot to be thankful for this year, and the listeners are included in that. So Kyle Hunter, HunterSportsPicks.com, at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter. Thank you so much, man, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Sounds good. Thanks.